You really think I'm just some broke old man who got lucky with a rich son, don't you? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I watched my daughter-in-law's face change from polite tolerance to something much uglier. She didn't know that I'd been listening from the kitchen doorway for the past 10 minutes, hearing every word she'd said to her sister on the phone about Sam's pathetic father, and how they'd have to carry the dead weight now that I was moving closer to help with the grandkids. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes the people who think they know everything about your worth are the ones who know absolutely nothing at all. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get to watch karma work in real time when you hold all the cards and nobody knows you're even playing the game. My name is Robert Chandler, and this is the story of how I went from being treated like a charity case by my own family to watching them scramble for forgiveness when they discovered I'd been sitting on $85 million the entire time. Picture this, the moment when the people who'd spent months making you feel small suddenly realize you could buy and sell their entire world without blinking. But before I tell you how satisfying that moment was, let me ask you something. How are you doing today? Where are you watching this from? I hope wherever you are, you're somewhere comfortable, because this story is going to take you on a ride that'll make you question everything you think you know about family, respect, and the price of keeping secrets. I'm curious about your own experiences with family dynamics. Have you ever been underestimated by people who should have known better? Drop a comment and let me know, because I have a feeling this story is going to hit close to home for a lot of you. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe because stories like this one don't come around every day. But let me start from the beginning, back when I was just a 62-year-old widower who'd lost everything that mattered to him, or at least that's what everyone thought. 3 years ago, I was living in a small apartment in Portland, working part-time at a hardware store, driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic that made concerning noises every time I started it. My son Sam lived in Seattle with his new wife Jennifer, and from the outside, it looked like he'd married way up while his old man had fallen way down. Jennifer came from money, real money, the kind that bought you a house in Bellevue with a 3-car garage and a view of Lake Washington. Sam worked in tech, pulling down a decent salary, but nothing compared to what Jennifer's family had. I was proud of my son. He'd worked hard, graduated from college, built a good life for himself. When he called to tell me he was getting married, I could hear the happiness in his voice, and that was enough for me. I'd raised him right after his mother died when he was 16, and seeing him find love again after everything we'd been through together, that felt like the only victory I needed. The wedding was beautiful. Small ceremony, maybe 50 people, held at Jennifer's family estate outside Seattle. I wore my one good suit, the navy one I'd bought for job interviews that never seemed to pan out the way I hoped. I sat in the front row, watching my son marry this brilliant, accomplished woman, and I felt grateful. Grateful that he'd found someone who made him smile the way his mother used to make me smile. Jennifer's family was polite to me that day. Polite in that careful way people are when they're not sure what to do with you but know they have to acknowledge your existence. Her father, Richard, shook my hand and asked about my work at the hardware store with the kind of interest you show when you're trying to be nice but can't quite hide the fact that you think someone's life is a little sad. Her mother, Patricia, complimented my suit and asked if I needed help finding a hotel for the night, even though Sam had already told them I was staying with him and Jennifer. I didn't mind. I understood their perspective. Here was their daughter, this Harvard MBA who worked for a consulting firm and drove a BMW, marrying a guy whose father sold screws and paint samples for $12 an hour. They were trying to be kind, and I appreciated that more than they knew. What I didn't tell anyone that day, what I hadn't told anyone in 3 years, was that the small apartment and the hardware store job and the beat-up Honda were all choices. Deliberate choices I'd made after my wife Sarah died, when I decided that I needed to figure out who I really was when everything else was stripped away. You see, Sarah and I had built something together. Something big. Back in the early days of the internet, when everyone thought we were crazy for believing that people would want to buy books online, we'd invested everything we had into a little startup run by some kid who had big dreams and bigger ambitions. Most people thought we were throwing our money away. Sarah's sister called us idiots. My brother said we'd lost our minds. But Sarah believed in the vision, and I believed in Sarah, so we took the $40,000 we'd saved for a down payment on a bigger house and handed it over to Jeff Bezos in 1995. By the time Sarah died in 2019, that $40,000 had become something I still couldn't quite believe when I looked at the numbers. $85 million, sitting in investment accounts that I barely touched, growing every year while I learned how to live without the woman who'd made every risk worth taking. After the funeral, after the lawyers and the paperwork and the endless decisions about what to do with a fortune I'd never wanted without her, I made a choice that probably seemed crazy to anyone who knew the truth. I moved out of our big house in the suburbs, sold most of our things, and rented a small apartment in a neighborhood where nobody knew my name or my story. I took a job at Nolan's Hardware because I liked the smell of sawdust and the simple satisfaction of helping people fix things that were broken. I told Sam I was downsizing, simplifying my life, dealing with grief in my own way. All of that was true. What I didn't tell him was that I was also conducting an experiment. I wanted to know what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not what I had. I wanted to understand how people treated you when they thought you had nothing to offer except your time and your attention and your willingness to show up. For 3 years, I lived that experiment. I made friends with my neighbors, people who invited me over for dinner not because they wanted something from me but because they enjoyed my company. I helped customers at the hardware store solve problems, and they came back not because I was rich but because I listened and I cared about getting things right. I dated a little, met women who were interested in Robert the hardware store clerk, not Robert the millionaire. It was the most honest I'd felt since Sarah died. Maybe the most honest I'd felt in decades. But then Sam called with news that changed everything. "Dad, Jennifer's pregnant." The joy in his voice was infectious, and I found myself grinning alone in my small kitchen, holding the phone like it was made of gold. My first grandchild. Sarah would have been over the moon. "That's incredible, son. How's Jennifer feeling?" "She's good, tired but good. Listen, Dad, we've been talking, and we want you to be really involved. We want this baby to know their grandfather, to have you around as much as possible." My heart swelled. "I'd love that. The thing is, we were wondering if you'd consider moving up here. I know it's a big ask, and I know you've got your life in Portland, but Jennifer and I have been looking at places, and there's this great senior community about 20 minutes from our house. It's affordable, really nice, and you'd be close enough to help out but far enough to have your own space." I could hear the careful way he was presenting this, like he was worried about hurting my feelings or making me feel like a burden. It broke my heart a little, knowing that my son was trying to figure out how to afford helping his father when I could have bought that senior community without making a dent in my accounts. "Send me the information," I told him. "Let me think about it." But I'd already decided. I was going to move to Seattle, and I was going to continue my experiment. I wanted to see how Jennifer's family treated the broke grandfather who needed help finding affordable housing. I wanted to know how my son and daughter-in-law would handle having me around when they thought I was a financial burden they were taking on out of love and obligation. Most of all, I wanted to meet my grandchild as the man I'd become over the past 3 years, not the man I'd been when money made everything easier. I had no idea that decision would lead to 6 months of treatment that would test every ounce of patience and self-control I'd developed since Sarah died. I had no idea that I'd end up sitting in my daughter-in-law's kitchen, listening to her tell her sister that I was dead weight, while I held the power to change her entire world with a single phone call to my financial advisor. But that's exactly where this story was heading, and the ride was about to get very, very interesting. The senior community Sam found for me was called Sunset Gardens, and the name should have been my first warning. Nothing good ever comes from a place that tries that hard to sound cheerful. It was a collection of small apartments designed for people on fixed incomes, complete with a community center that smelled like disinfectant and hosted bingo nights every Tuesday. I toured it with Sam and Jennifer on a rainy Thursday in March, walking through the narrow hallways while the property manager, a woman named Carol with aggressively cheerful energy, explained the amenities like she was selling us a luxury resort. The laundry facilities are shared, but very clean, Carol chirped, opening a door to reveal a room with 4 washing machines that had seen better decades. And the community garden is lovely in the summer. Residents can grow their own vegetables. I watched Jennifer's face during the tour, saw the way she tried to hide her discomfort when Carol showed us the tiny kitchenette that would be my new home. Jennifer kept glancing at Sam with this expression I couldn't quite read, something between pity and resignation. "It's perfect," I told Carol, and I meant it. The apartment was small but clean, with a window that looked out onto a courtyard where a few elderly residents sat on benches feeding pigeons. It reminded me of the first apartment Sarah and I had shared when we were young and broke and happy. "Dad, are you sure?" Sam asked. "We could look at a few more places, maybe find something with a little more space." "This is exactly what I need," I said, and I signed the lease that afternoon. What I didn't expect was how quickly Jennifer's family would make their opinions known about my living situation. The first incident happened 2 weeks after I moved in. Sam and Jennifer had invited me over for dinner, and Jennifer's parents were there too. Richard and Patricia had driven up from their place in Tacoma, and the conversation over Jennifer's perfectly prepared salmon was polite but strained. "How are you settling in at your new place, Robert?" Patricia asked, cutting her fish into precise small pieces. "Very well, thank you. The neighbors are friendly, and it's quiet." "That's wonderful," she said, but her tone suggested she thought it was anything but wonderful. Jennifer mentioned it's quite affordable. There was something in the way she said affordable that made it sound like a disease. "It fits my budget perfectly," I replied. Richard cleared his throat. "You know, Robert, if you ever need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. We consider you family now." I appreciated the sentiment, I really did. But there was something patronizing in his delivery, like he was speaking to a child who needed reassurance that the adults would take care of everything. "That's very kind of you," I said. Jennifer jumped in then, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. "Actually, Dad, we've been thinking about ways you could maybe supplement your income a little. Richard knows someone who's looking for part-time help with bookkeeping, very flexible hours, and it pays well." I looked around the table at these well-meaning people who were trying to solve a problem I didn't have, and I felt something twist in my chest. Not anger, exactly, but a deep sadness that my son felt responsible for his father's financial situation. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I'm happy with my job at the hardware store." "Of course," Jennifer said quickly. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable." But I could see it in her eyes, the same look I'd been getting from people for 3 years. The look that said, this poor man, working retail at his age, living in subsidized housing, probably counting every penny. We need to help him because he clearly can't help himself. After dinner, while Jennifer and her mother cleaned up, Sam walked me out to my car. "Dad, I hope you don't mind them offering to help. They mean well." "I know they do, son. It's just that Jennifer worries about you, especially with the baby coming. She wants to make sure you're taken care of." I put my hand on his shoulder, this good man I'd raised who was trying to balance taking care of his father with keeping his wife happy. "Sam, I'm fine. Better than fine. I'm exactly where I want to be." He nodded, but I could see he didn't really believe me. How could he? From his perspective, his father had gone from a comfortable middle-class life to scraping by in a senior community, and he was too proud to accept help. The second incident happened a month later, at Jennifer's baby shower. I wasn't supposed to be there. Baby showers are traditionally women-only affairs, but Jennifer had insisted I come for the last hour to see the gifts and have cake. It was a sweet gesture, and I was touched that she wanted to include me. The shower was held at Patricia's house, a sprawling place in Tacoma with a view of Puget Sound and enough space to host a small wedding. I arrived as planned, just as the gift opening was winding down, and found myself in a living room full of Jennifer's friends and female relatives, all of whom seemed to have stepped out of a catalog for successful professional women. Jennifer was glowing, 6 months pregnant and surrounded by piles of expensive baby gear. High-end strollers, organic cotton onesies, a crib that probably cost more than I made in 2 months at the hardware store. "Robert," Patricia called out when she saw me. "Come meet everyone. This is Jennifer's father-in-law." The introductions were polite but brief. I could feel the women sizing me up, trying to figure out how I fit into this picture of affluent suburban motherhood. My khakis and button-down shirt, perfectly respectable for a hardware store employee, looked shabby next to their designer outfits. "Robert works at a hardware store," Patricia explained to one of Jennifer's friends, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a handbag that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "He's so handy, always fixing things for people." The way she said it made my job sound like a charming hobby rather than actual work. "That's wonderful," the blonde woman said with the kind of smile people give when they're trying to be polite about something they don't understand. "It must be so satisfying to work with your hands." I was about to respond when Jennifer's sister Amanda joined the conversation. Amanda was younger than Jennifer, recently married to a surgeon, and had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. "Robert, Jennifer told me you're living in one of those senior communities now. How do you like it?" "It's very nice," I said. "I think it's wonderful that places like that exist," Amanda continued. "It must be such a relief to have affordable housing options when you're on a fixed income." There it was again, that careful phrasing that made my life sound like a problem that had been solved by charitable institutions. "Jennifer and Sam are so good to look out for you," Patricia added. "Not every young couple would be so thoughtful about taking care of family." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Taking care of family. Like I was a responsibility they'd inherited, a burden they were handling with admirable grace. "They're wonderful kids," I managed. "Oh, they really are," Amanda agreed. "Jennifer was just telling us how they're already planning to help with college funds and everything. It's so sweet how they're thinking ahead." I must have looked confused because Amanda clarified, "For when you need more assistance as you get older." Jennifer said they're already setting aside money to help with medical expenses and maybe eventually a nicer care facility. The room seemed to tilt slightly. My son and daughter-in-law were planning their financial future around the assumption that I would become increasingly dependent on them. They were budgeting for my decline, setting aside money they could have used for their own dreams because they believed their father was too poor to take care of himself. "That's very thoughtful of them," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Jennifer's always been a planner," Patricia said proudly. "She's already calculated how much they'll need to save each month to make sure you're comfortable." She showed me the spreadsheet. A spreadsheet. My daughter-in-law had created a spreadsheet to budget for my future care, calculating the cost of keeping her husband's father from becoming a burden on society. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but really I needed a moment to process what I'd just learned. Standing in Patricia's guest bathroom, surrounded by expensive soaps and monogrammed towels, I stared at myself in the mirror and tried to figure out how I felt about this revelation. Part of me was touched. Jennifer and Sam were good people who were willing to sacrifice for family. They were planning to take care of me even though they thought it would be a financial strain. But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger by the minute, was angry. Not at their willingness to help, but at the assumptions they'd made. They'd looked at my life and decided I was failing, that I needed to be managed and budgeted for and handled like a problem to be solved. They'd never asked if I was happy. They'd never considered that my choices might be deliberate. They'd seen the small apartment and the retail job and the old car, and they'd written a story about a man who'd fallen on hard times and was too proud to ask for help. When I came back to the living room, the conversation had moved on to nursery themes and pediatrician recommendations. I sat quietly, eating cake and watching these women plan for Jennifer's future, and I made a decision. I was going to continue my experiment, but with a new element. I wanted to see exactly how far this narrative would go. I wanted to understand what it felt like to be seen as a charity case by people who claimed to love you. I wanted to know who would treat me with respect when they thought I had nothing to offer, and who would show their true colors when they believed I was dependent on their generosity. It was a dangerous game I was starting, and I had no idea how much it would hurt before it was over. But I was committed now, committed to seeing this through to whatever end was waiting. The baby was due in 4 months, and I had a feeling that's when things would really get interesting. The call came on a Tuesday morning in July, 3 weeks before Jennifer's due date. I was at the hardware store, helping a customer choose the right screws for a deck repair, when my phone buzzed with Sam's number. "Dad, we need you to come to the hospital. Jennifer's in labor." My hands went numb. "But it's too early." "I know, but the doctors say everything's going to be fine. Can you get here?" I told my manager I had a family emergency and drove to Seattle faster than my old Honda had probably moved in years. The whole way there, my mind raced between excitement and terror. My grandchild was coming early, and all I could think about was Sarah, how she would have dropped everything to be there, how she would have known exactly what to do. I found Sam in the maternity ward waiting room, pacing like a caged animal. His hair was sticking up in all directions, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "How is she?" I asked. "Scared but okay. The baby's heart rate is good, and the doctors aren't worried about the timing. Jennifer's been in labor for about 6 hours." I hugged my son, feeling how tense he was, how much he needed someone to tell him everything would be all right. "She's going to be fine," I said. "And so is the baby." "I hope so, Dad. I really hope so." We sat together in those uncomfortable hospital chairs, watching other families come and go, sharing the strange intimacy that waiting rooms create. Sam told me about the nursery they'd finished just in time, about the name they'd chosen but weren't telling anyone yet, about how Jennifer had been having contractions for 2 days but insisted they were just practice ones. "She's stubborn," he said with a tired smile. "Wonder where she gets that from," I replied, and we both laughed. Around noon, a nurse came out to tell us that Jennifer was ready to push. Sam disappeared into the delivery room, and I was left alone with my thoughts and a growing sense that everything was about to change. Emma Rose Chandler was born at 2:47 p.m., weighing 5 pounds and 8 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly despite her early arrival. When Sam came out to get me, his face was streaked with tears and he couldn't stop grinning. "Dad, she's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." I followed him into the room where Jennifer was holding this tiny person who had just become the most important thing in my world. Jennifer looked exhausted but radiant, and when she saw me, she smiled in a way that made my chest tight. "Robert, meet your granddaughter." I held Emma for the first time, this impossibly small person who weighed nothing and everything all at once. She opened her eyes and looked at me with that unfocused newborn gaze, and I felt something shift inside me that I hadn't experienced since Sarah died. Pure, uncomplicated love. "Hello, beautiful girl," I whispered. "I'm your grandpa." The next few hours were a blur of nurses and visitors and phone calls. Jennifer's parents arrived with flowers and balloons, and the room filled with the kind of joyful chaos that new babies bring. I stayed in the background mostly, content to watch my family celebrate this miracle. But as the day wore on, I started to notice things. Small things that probably wouldn't have bothered me before I'd spent 6 months being treated like a charity case. When the nurse asked about insurance and billing, Richard immediately stepped forward to handle the paperwork. "Don't worry about any of this," he told Sam. "We'll take care of everything." When Jennifer mentioned being tired and wanting to stay an extra day for observation, Patricia started making calls about private rooms and upgraded meal plans. "Money's no object when it comes to our granddaughter," she said. When Sam worried about taking time off work for paternity leave, Richard clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Take all the time you need. If money gets tight, we'll help out." I watched this family solve every problem with their checkbook, and I realized that this was how they approached everything. Financial security was their answer to every worry, their solution to every challenge. And then Jennifer said something that made my blood run cold. "Robert, I hope you don't mind, but we've been thinking about Emma's future, and we want to make sure she has everything she needs. We've already started a college fund, and we're planning to contribute to it regularly. We know you'd want to help if you could, but please don't feel any pressure. We've got it covered." The room went quiet for a moment, and I could feel everyone looking at me with that same expression I'd been seeing for months. Poor Robert, who wants to help but can't afford to. Poor Robert, who loves his granddaughter but has nothing to offer except his presence. "That's very thoughtful," I managed. "We just want you to know that Emma will never want for anything," Jennifer continued. "Education, opportunities, experiences. We're going to make sure she has it all." Patricia nodded approvingly. "It's so important to plan ahead. Children are expensive, but they're worth every penny." "Absolutely," Richard agreed. "We've already talked to our financial advisor about the best investment strategies for long-term growth." I held my granddaughter and listened to these people plan her future with their money, and I felt something break inside me. Not because they were wrong to want the best for Emma, but because they'd made it clear that I had no role to play in providing that future. They'd looked at me and decided I was the grandfather who would show up for birthdays and holidays with modest gifts from the clearance rack. I was the one who would babysit when they needed help but couldn't contribute to the things that really mattered. I was the loving but limited grandfather who would give Emma hugs and stories but leave the important stuff to the people with real resources. That night, after everyone had gone home and it was just Sam, Jennifer, Emma, and me in the quiet hospital room, I made a decision that would change everything. "I want to set up a trust fund for Emma," I said quietly. Sam looked up from the chair where he'd been dozing. "Dad, that's really sweet, but you don't need to worry about that. We've got her future covered." "I know you do. But I want to do this." Jennifer shifted in her hospital bed, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Robert, we appreciate the thought, but we know money's tight for you. Please don't feel like you have to. I want to put $50,000 into a trust for Emma's education." The room went completely silent. Sam stared at me like I'd just announced I was moving to Mars. "Dad, where would you get $50,000? This was it. The moment where I could have told them everything, where I could have explained about Sarah and the investment and the $85 million sitting in accounts they didn't know existed. I could have ended the experiment right there, could have watched their faces change as they realized everything they thought they knew about me was wrong. Instead, I said, "I've been saving for a long time. I want Emma to have opportunities." "Dad, you can't afford that," Sam said gently. "You're living in subsidized housing and working retail. $50,000 is probably more than you make in 3 years. I can afford it. Jennifer and Sam exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happens without words. I could see them trying to figure out how to handle their delusional father-in-law who thought he could contribute $50,000 to his granddaughter's future. Robert, Jennifer said carefully, we love that you want to help, but we can't let you empty your retirement savings for this. What would happen if you got sick? What if you needed long-term care? I'll be fine. Dad, please, Sam said. We've got Emma's education covered. Save your money for yourself. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be responsible and practical, and I realized that he was trying to protect me from my own generosity. He thought I was being reckless with money I couldn't afford to lose. I'm going to set up the trust, I said firmly. With what money? Sam asked, his voice rising slightly. I met his eyes and said the words that would launch us all toward a reckoning none of us were prepared for. With my money. The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Sam and Jennifer processing what I'd said, trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out if their broke father and father-in-law had lost his mind or if there was something they didn't understand. Dad, Sam said slowly, what aren't you telling us? I looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, and I made the choice that would define the next 6 months of our lives. Nothing you need to worry about right now. Just trust me when I say I can afford to take care of my granddaughter. I kissed Emma's forehead, hugged Sam and Jennifer, and left the hospital with their confused stares burning into my back. The next morning, I called my financial advisor and had him set up a $50,000 education trust for Emma Rose Chandler. When Sam called to ask how I'd managed it, I told him I'd liquidated some old investments. It wasn't technically a lie. I had liquidated some investments. Just not the kind he was imagining. But I could hear the worry in his voice, the fear that his father had done something financially irresponsible out of love for his granddaughter. I could picture him and Jennifer lying awake at night, wondering if they needed to intervene, if they needed to take control of my finances before I made any more reckless decisions. I'd given them exactly what I wanted to give them, a reason to believe I was more unstable than they'd thought, more in need of their management and oversight. The experiment was entering a new phase, and I had no idea how much it was going to hurt before it was over. The first sign that things were spiraling came 2 weeks after Emma was born, when Sam showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. I was making coffee in my small kitchen when I heard the knock. Through the peephole, I could see my son standing in the hallway with that expression he'd worn as a teenager when he was about to confess to something he knew I wouldn't like. Sam, what a nice surprise, I said, opening the door. Hey, Dad. Can we talk? He looked around my apartment like he was seeing it for the first time, taking in the second-hand furniture and the small television and the stack of library books on my coffee table. I could practically see him calculating the cost of my life, trying to figure out where $50,000 could have possibly come from. Of course. Coffee? Sure. We sat at my tiny kitchen table, and Sam fidgeted with his mug for a long moment before speaking. Dad, Jennifer and I have been talking, and we're worried about you. Worried how? The trust fund for Emma. We've been trying to figure out how you managed it, and nothing adds up. You're living here, working part-time, driving a car that's older than some of my coworkers. Where did $50,000 come from? I'd been preparing for this conversation for 2 weeks, but hearing the concern in my son's voice still hit me harder than I'd expected. I told you, I liquidated some old investments. What investments? Dad, I helped you with your finances after Mom died. I saw your bank statements, your retirement accounts. There wasn't enough there to cover something like this. He was right, of course. The accounts he'd seen were the small ones, the everyday checking and savings that Sarah and I had used for regular expenses. The real money had always been managed separately, in accounts that only Sarah and I knew about. "There are things you don't know about your mother's and my financial situation," I said carefully. "Like what?" "Like the fact that we made some very good investment decisions early in our marriage." Sam leaned forward, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. "Dad, if you had money, why are you living like this? Why are you working at a hardware store and living in subsidized housing?" This was the question I'd been dreading, because answering it honestly would mean explaining the experiment, and I wasn't ready to do that yet. "Because this is how I want to live." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense to me." Sam ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was frustrated and trying to solve a problem that seemed impossible. "Dad, if you have money, real money, then Jennifer and I have been worrying about you for no reason. We've been planning our budget around helping you, setting aside money we could have used for other things because we thought you needed support." There it was, the confirmation of what I'd suspected. My son and daughter-in-law had been sacrificing their own financial goals because they believed I was struggling. "I never asked you to do that." "You didn't have to ask. You're my father. Of course we were going to help." The guilt hit me like a physical blow. These good people had been limiting their own dreams because they thought I needed their help, and I'd let them do it. I'd watched them make sacrifices for a problem that didn't exist. "Sam, I appreciate that you want to take care of me, but I don't need you to." "Then why are you living like you do?" I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be honest and straightforward, and I realized I was about to lie to him in a way that would change our relationship forever. "Because I'm trying to figure out who I am without your mother. Because I needed to know what it felt like to live simply, to work with my hands, to be valued for something other than what I could afford." It wasn't entirely a lie. Those were all true reasons for the choices I'd made. But they weren't the whole truth, and Sam deserved better than partial honesty. "Dad, that's..." He paused, searching for words. "That's actually kind of beautiful. But it's also crazy. You could be comfortable. You could travel, enjoy your retirement, live somewhere nice." "I am comfortable. I am enjoying my retirement. I do live somewhere nice. You live in a one-bedroom apartment with a kitchenette. And I'm happy here." Sam stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to reconcile the father he thought he knew with this new information. "How much money are we talking about, Dad?" "Enough." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting right now." He left that day more confused than when he'd arrived, and I knew I'd bought myself some time but created a bigger problem. Sam was going to go home and tell Jennifer that his father had money but was choosing to live like he didn't, and they were going to spend the next few weeks trying to figure out what that meant. I was right. Over the next month, the questions became more frequent and more pointed. Jennifer started asking about my investments during our weekly dinners, trying to get me to explain how a hardware store employee could afford to set up a $50,000 trust fund. Sam began making comments about my apartment, suggesting that maybe I could afford something a little nicer, maybe with a second bedroom for when Emma got older. But the real pressure came from Jennifer's family. Richard cornered me at Emma's baptism, a small ceremony held at Jennifer's childhood church with about 30 family members and friends in attendance. I was holding Emma, who looked impossibly tiny in her white christening gown, when Richard approached with 2 glasses of champagne and a determined expression. "Robert, I've been thinking about our conversation at the hospital," he said, handing me a glass. "What conversation?" "About Emma's trust fund. Jennifer mentioned that you've set aside quite a bit of money for her education." "I have." "That's very generous of you." "Very generous. But I have to ask, as someone who's been managing investments for 30 years, where did that money come from? I could feel other family members starting to pay attention to our conversation. Patricia was watching from across the room, and Jennifer's sister Amanda had moved closer, pretending to admire the church's stained glass windows while obviously listening. I made some good investment decisions over the years, I said. What kind of investments? The profitable kind. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. Robert, I'm not trying to pry, but Jennifer and Sam are family now, and family looks out for each other. If you're sitting on some kind of windfall, maybe we should talk about proper financial planning. Make sure you're not making any mistakes that could hurt you down the road. The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was talking to me like I was a child who'd found a $20 bill and needed adult supervision to spend it wisely. I appreciate your concern, but I'm quite capable of managing my own finances. Of course you are. But sometimes it helps to have a professional perspective. I'd be happy to take a look at your portfolio, maybe suggest some strategies for maximizing your returns. That won't be necessary. Robert, Patricia had joined us now, her voice warm but insistent. We just want to make sure you're protected. Sometimes people who aren't used to having money can make decisions that seem smart but aren't in their best long-term interests. People who aren't used to having money. The phrase hung in the air like smoke, and I felt something cold and angry settle in my chest. What makes you think I'm not used to having money? Patricia looked flustered. Well, I just meant, your living situation, your job, we assumed. You assumed that because I work at a hardware store and live in a modest apartment, I must be financially illiterate. That's not what we meant, Richard said quickly. Isn't it? The conversation was attracting more attention now. Sam had noticed the tension and was making his way over, still carrying Emma's diaper bag and looking concerned. Is everything okay over here? He asked. Your father was just telling us about his investment success, Patricia said with a tight smile. Dad's always been good with money, Sam said loyally, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I'm sure he has, Richard replied. We're just offering to help with some professional guidance. Sometimes when people come into unexpected money, they can benefit from expert advice. What unexpected money? Sam asked. And there it was, the moment when I realized that Jennifer's family had decided I was either lying about having money or too incompetent to manage it properly. They'd looked at my life and concluded that any financial resources I might have were either fraudulent or in need of their oversight. The money I used for Emma's trust fund, I said calmly. Right, Richard said. And we're just wondering if maybe you'd like some help making sure that money is working as hard as it can for you. I looked around at these people, these well-meaning, successful, condescending people who thought they knew what was best for me, and I made a decision that would escalate everything beyond the point of no return. I'll think about it, I said. But what I was really thinking about was how satisfying it was going to be when they discovered exactly how wrong they were about everything. The next week, I did something that I knew would drive them all crazy. I bought a new car. Not a luxury car, nothing that would give away the real scope of my resources. Just a reliable, 3-year-old Toyota Camry that I paid for in cash at the dealership. When Sam saw it parked outside my apartment building, he called me immediately. Dad, where did the car come from? I bought it. With what money? My money. Dad, this is getting ridiculous. You can't keep making major purchases without explaining where the money is coming from. Jennifer and I are starting to think you're doing something illegal. The accusation hit me like a slap. My own son thought I might be involved in something criminal because he couldn't reconcile my lifestyle with my apparent resources. Sam, I have never done anything illegal in my life. Then explain this to me. Explain how you went from needing subsidized housing to buying cars and setting up trust funds. I never needed subsidized housing. I chose subsidized housing. Why? Because I wanted to. That's not a reason, Dad. That's not a reason for anything. I could hear the frustration and fear in his voice, and I realized that my experiment was hurting him in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was scared that his father was losing his mind, scared that I was making reckless financial decisions, scared that he was going to have to step in and take control of my life. Sam, I need you to trust me. I want to trust you, but you're not giving me anything to trust. You're acting like a completely different person, and I don't understand why. After he hung up, I sat in my small apartment and wondered if I'd gone too far. The experiment had started as a way to understand how people treated you when they thought you had nothing to offer. But it had evolved into something darker, something that was causing real pain to people I loved. But I wasn't ready to stop. Not yet. Because I was learning things about my family that I needed to know, things about respect and assumptions and the way money changed how people saw you. I was learning that even the people who loved you most could look at your choices and decide you were incompetent if those choices didn't match their expectations. And I was learning that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones people tell themselves about who you are and what you're capable of. The real test was still coming, and I had a feeling it was going to be more devastating than anything I'd experienced so far. The intervention happened on a Thursday evening in October, 3 months after Emma was born. I should have seen it coming, but I'd been so focused on maintaining my experiment that I'd missed all the warning signs. I was at Sam and Jennifer's house for our weekly dinner, playing with Emma on the living room floor while Jennifer finished cooking. Emma was starting to smile now, these beautiful, gummy grins that made my heart feel too big for my chest. I was making silly faces at her when I heard the doorbell ring. "I'll get it," Sam called from the kitchen. I heard voices in the hallway, familiar voices that made my stomach drop. Richard and Patricia. Then another voice I didn't recognize, a woman speaking in the careful, professional tone that social workers and therapists use when they're trying to sound non-threatening. Sam came back into the living room followed by Jennifer's parents and a woman in her 50s wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. "Dad, we need to talk," Sam said, and his voice had that forced calm that people use when they're trying not to panic. "About what?" "About your recent behavior and some concerns we have about your decision-making." The woman with the portfolio stepped forward. "Mr. Chandler, my name is Dr. Sarah Martinez. I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, and your family has asked me to speak with you about some changes they've noticed in your behavior over the past few months." The room tilted slightly. They'd brought a psychiatrist. My family had decided I was mentally incompetent and had brought a professional to evaluate me. "I see," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Jennifer came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and I could see she'd been crying. "Robert, we're worried about you." "Really worried?" "Worried about what, exactly?" Sam sat down across from me, his expression pained. "Dad, you've been making financial decisions that don't make sense. The trust fund, the car, and now Jennifer's mother saw you at the bank yesterday making what looked like a very large cash withdrawal." Patricia nodded gravely. "I was there making a deposit, and I saw you at the teller window with what appeared to be several $1,000s in cash." "Robert, that's not normal behavior for someone in your financial situation." "What's my financial situation, Patricia?" "Well, you're living on a fixed income, working part-time retail, living in subsidized housing. And yet I seem to have access to money that you can't account for." Dr. Martinez opened her portfolio and pulled out a notepad. "Mr. Chandler, can you tell me where this money is coming from?" I looked around the room at these people who claimed to love me, who had decided that my behavior was so inexplicable that it required psychiatric intervention. It's my money. But where did you get it? Sam asked. Dad, I've been going over this for months. I know what you and Mom had when she died. I helped you with the paperwork, remember? There wasn't enough there to support the kind of spending you've been doing. There are accounts you don't know about. What accounts? Accounts that your mother and I maintain separately. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Mr. Chandler, sometimes when people are grieving, they can develop elaborate fantasies about their financial situation. It's not uncommon for widowed individuals to believe they have access to resources that don't actually exist. The words hit me like a physical blow. She thought I was delusional. They all thought I was delusional. You think I'm imagining the money. We think you might be confused, Jennifer said gently. Robert, grief can affect people in unexpected ways. Sometimes it can make us believe things that aren't true. Show me the accounts, Richard said. If you have money, show us the bank statements. Show us the investment portfolios. Prove that this money exists. I stared at him, this man who had decided that I was either lying or mentally ill, and I felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could be repaired. I don't have to prove anything to you. Dad, please, Sam said. We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help. But if you're spending money that doesn't exist, if you're writing checks that are going to bounce, you could end up in serious legal trouble. What if I told you I had $10 million? I asked quietly. The room went silent. Dr. Martinez made a note on her pad. Dad, that would be impossible, Sam said. Why? Because you don't. Because if you had $10 million, you wouldn't be living the way you do. What if I told you I had $50 million? Robert, Patricia said in the voice you use with confused elderly people, that's not realistic. What if I told you I had $85 million? Dr. Martinez looked up from her notepad. Mr. Chandler, these kinds of grandiose financial fantasies are actually quite common in cases of grief-related cognitive decline. Grief-related cognitive decline. They thought I was losing my mind. You think I'm making this up? We think you're hurting, Jennifer said, tears starting to flow again. We think you miss Sarah so much that you've created this story about having money because it makes you feel more secure. And we think you need help, Sam added. Professional help. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and thoughtful and responsible, and I realized that he was prepared to have me declared mentally incompetent if I didn't submit to their version of reality. What kind of help? Dr. Martinez consulted her notes. I'd like to recommend a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, including cognitive testing and a review of your financial records by a court-appointed guardian. A court-appointed guardian. They wanted to take away my legal right to manage my own affairs. And if I refuse? Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be, Sam said. We love you, and we want to help you, but we can't let you destroy yourself financially. What if the money is real? Then you'll be able to prove it, Richard said. And we'll all apologize for doubting you. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady. Emma was still on the floor, playing with a soft toy, completely unaware that her grandfather's life was being dismantled by people who thought they were saving him. I need some air, I said. Robert, please don't leave, Jennifer called after me. We can work this out. But I was already walking toward the door, my mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. My family had decided I was mentally ill. They were prepared to have me evaluated by psychiatrists and potentially stripped of my legal autonomy because they couldn't believe that I might have money. I drove back to my apartment in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Once inside, I sat on my second-hand couch and stared at the wall, trying to process what had just occurred. They thought I was delusional. They thought I was making up stories about having money because I couldn't cope with grief and poverty. They were so convinced that they knew the truth about my life that they were willing to have me declared incompetent rather than consider that they might be wrong. I pulled out my phone and called my financial advisor. "Robert, good to hear from you. How can I help?" "Patrick, I need you to prepare a complete portfolio summary. Every account, every investment, every asset. I need it printed and bound, and I need it tomorrow." "Of course. Is everything all right?" "My family thinks I'm mentally ill because they can't believe I have money." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, what?" "They've brought in a psychiatrist. They want to have me evaluated for cognitive decline because I've been spending money they don't think I have." "Robert, you have $85 million. I know that. You know that. But they don't know that, and they've decided that means I'm delusional." "Why don't they know about your assets?" It was a fair question, and one I wasn't sure I could answer without sounding as crazy as my family thought I was. "Because I've been conducting an experiment in how people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer." Another long pause. "Robert, I think maybe you should tell them the truth." "I think maybe you're right." But as I hung up the phone, I realized that telling them the truth now would be almost as devastating as letting them continue to believe I was mentally ill. How do you explain to people you love that you've been lying to them for months? How do you tell your son that you let him worry about your financial security while you were sitting on a fortune? How do you tell your daughter-in-law that you watched her create spreadsheets to budget for your care while you could have bought her house with pocket change? I'd started this experiment to learn about respect and assumptions and the way money changed relationships. But I'd learned something much darker. I'd learned that even love has limits when it comes to understanding choices that don't make sense. My family loved me enough to stage an intervention. They loved me enough to bring in professionals and consider legal guardianship. They loved me enough to try to save me from what they saw as self-destructive behavior. But they didn't love me enough to trust that I might know what I was doing. And now I had to decide whether to end the experiment by revealing the truth, or let them proceed with their plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. Either choice would destroy something precious, and I wasn't sure our relationships would survive either outcome. The phone rang. Sam's number. "Dad, please come back. We can figure this out together." "Can we?" "Yes. But you have to be honest with us. You have to tell us what's really going on." I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built to test the people I loved most, and I realized that the experiment had succeeded beyond my worst fears. I'd learned exactly how my family saw me when they thought I had nothing to offer. And now I had to live with that knowledge for the rest of my life. I didn't go back that night. Instead, I sat in my small apartment and watched my phone buzz with increasingly frantic calls from Sam, Jennifer, and even Patricia. I let them all go to voicemail. The first message was from Sam: "Dad, please call me back. We're worried sick. We just want to help." The second was from Jennifer: "Robert, I'm sorry if we upset you. Please come back so we can talk about this calmly." The third was from Patricia: "Robert, Dr. Martinez says it's important that we don't let you isolate yourself right now. Please call one of us." By the 10th message, Sam's tone had changed: "Dad, if you don't call me back in the next hour, I'm coming over there." I turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to pounding on my door. Through the peephole, I could see Sam, Jennifer, and a man I didn't recognize wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. "Dad, I know you're in there. Please open the door." I considered not answering, but I knew Sam well enough to know he'd call the police if he thought I was in danger. I opened the door but left the chain lock engaged. "What do you want?" "We want to talk to you." This is Mr. Peterson from Adult Protective Services. Adult Protective Services. They'd called social services on me. Mr. Chandler, Peterson said in a voice that was professionally kind but firm, your family has expressed concerns about your welfare. I'd like to speak with you for a few minutes. I'm fine. I'm sure you are, but I need to verify that for myself. May I come in? I looked at my son through the gap in the door, saw the fear and determination in his eyes, and realized that he was prepared to have the state intervene in my life if I didn't cooperate. I closed the door, removed the chain, and opened it again. Peterson was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of earnest expression that suggested he genuinely believed he was helping people. He looked around my apartment, taking notes on his clipboard. Mr. Chandler, your family is concerned that you may be experiencing some cognitive difficulties that are affecting your judgment, particularly regarding financial matters. My judgment is fine. I'm sure it feels that way to you. But sometimes when people are struggling with grief or other stressors, they can make decisions that seem logical to them but appear concerning to others. Sam stepped forward. Dad, just show him the bank statements. Show him where this money is coming from, and we'll all apologize and leave you alone. I don't have to show anyone anything. Peterson made another note. Mr. Chandler, refusing to provide basic financial documentation when family members are concerned about potential exploitation or self-harm can be considered a warning sign. Exploitation by whom? Sometimes elderly individuals become targets for scams or fraudulent investment schemes. The perpetrators often convince their victims that they have access to large sums of money that don't actually exist. They thought I was being scammed. They thought some criminal had convinced me I was rich and was stealing my actual money while feeding me fantasies about wealth I didn't possess. No one is scamming me. Dad, then prove it, Sam said, his voice breaking slightly. Please. Just prove it, and this all goes away. I looked at my son, at the desperation in his face, and I realized that my experiment had pushed him to a breaking point. He was terrified that his father was losing his mind, terrified that I was being victimized, terrified that he was going to have to watch me destroy myself while being powerless to stop it. What happens if I don't prove it? Peterson consulted his clipboard. If there's evidence of cognitive impairment affecting your ability to make sound financial decisions, the court can appoint a guardian to manage your affairs until you're able to demonstrate competency. And who would this guardian be? Typically, it would be a family member. In your case, probably your son. Sam would become my legal guardian. My own son would have the legal authority to control my finances, my living situation, my medical decisions. Everything I'd worked for, everything Sarah and I had built together, would be placed under his control because a social worker and a psychiatrist had decided I was mentally incompetent. I need time to think about this. Mr. Chandler, I understand this is overwhelming, but time is a factor here. Your family is reporting that you've been making increasingly erratic financial decisions. The longer we wait to address this, the more damage could be done. What kind of damage? Jennifer spoke up for the first time since they'd arrived. Robert, yesterday you withdrew $8,000 in cash from your bank account. The teller was concerned enough to call the branch manager. When they asked what you needed that much cash for, you said it was for personal expenses and refused to elaborate. I had withdrawn $8,000. I'd been planning to buy a small boat, something I could take out on the lake when I wanted to think. It was an impulse purchase, the kind of thing I'd never allowed myself when I was being careful about maintaining my modest lifestyle. I'm allowed to withdraw my own money. Not if it's putting you at risk, Peterson said. Mr. Chandler, carrying large amounts of cash makes you a target for robbery. It also suggests that you may not be thinking clearly about financial security. What if I told you I withdrew that money to buy a boat? Sam's face crumpled. Dad, you can't afford a boat. What if I told you I was planning to buy a house? Dad, please stop. What if I told you I was thinking about taking a trip to Europe? Robert, Jennifer said gently, these are all wonderful dreams, but they're not realistic given your actual financial situation. Peterson was writing furiously now. Mr. Chandler, these kinds of grandiose spending plans are consistent with what we see in cases of financial exploitation or cognitive decline. I sat down heavily on my couch, feeling the weight of their certainty pressing down on me like a physical force. They were so convinced that they knew the truth about my life that nothing I said could penetrate their assumptions. What happens next? I'm going to recommend a comprehensive evaluation, Peterson said. Cognitive testing, financial review, assessment of your living situation. If the evaluation indicates that you're unable to manage your affairs safely, the court will appoint a guardian. And if I refuse the evaluation? Then the court can order it. I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built to test the people I loved, and I realized that the test had backfired completely. Instead of learning how they treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer, I'd created a situation where they were prepared to take away my freedom to protect me from myself. How long do I have? The evaluation is scheduled for Monday morning. 4 days. I had 4 days before a team of professionals would examine me and potentially declare me mentally incompetent. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment and tried to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. I'd started this experiment with good intentions, wanting to understand something fundamental about human nature and family dynamics. But I'd created a monster that was now devouring everything I cared about. I could end it all with a single phone call to my financial advisor. I could have him fax over my portfolio summary, and within an hour, everyone would know that I had more money than they'd ever imagined. The evaluation would be cancelled, the guardianship proceedings would be dropped, and my family would be forced to confront the fact that they'd been completely wrong about me. But I'd also have to explain why I'd let them believe I was poor for so long. I'd have to tell Sam that I'd watched him sacrifice his own financial goals to help a father who didn't need help. I'd have to tell Jennifer that I'd sat through months of conversations about my financial limitations while knowing I could solve every problem they'd ever worried about. I'd have to admit that I'd been conducting an experiment on the people I loved most, using their concern for me as data points in a study of human behavior. The truth would hurt them almost as much as the lies had. That night, I called my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, an 80-year-old widow who'd become a friend over the past year. She was one of the few people who treated me exactly the same way regardless of what she thought about my financial situation. Robert, you sound terrible. What's wrong? I told her everything. The whole story, from Sarah's death to the investment to the experiment to the intervention. She listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or surprise. When I finished, there was a long silence. Robert, honey, what were you thinking? I was thinking I wanted to know who would respect me for who I am, not what I have. And what did you learn? I learned that even people who love you can decide you're incompetent if your choices don't make sense to them. Did you learn anything else? I thought about it. I learned that my son is willing to sacrifice his own happiness to take care of me. I learned that my daughter-in-law includes me in her family even when she thinks I'm a burden. I learned that people can love you enough to try to save you from yourself, even when it means making incredibly difficult decisions. Those sound like good things to learn. They are. But I also learned that they don't trust me enough to believe I might know what I'm doing. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Robert, did you give them any reason to trust you? Did you explain your choices, or did you just expect them to accept behavior that seemed irrational? The question hit me like a slap. She was right. I'd been so focused on testing my family that I'd never considered how my behavior looked from their perspective. I'd made choices that seemed crazy to anyone who didn't know the full story, and then I'd been hurt when they concluded I might be crazy. "I think I've made a terrible mistake," I said. "Yes, you have. But mistakes can be fixed if you're willing to do the work." "What kind of work?" "The kind where you tell the truth and ask for forgiveness and hope that the people who love you are willing to give you another chance." After I hung up, I sat in my dark apartment and thought about Monday's evaluation. I thought about Sam's face when he begged me to prove the money was real. I thought about Jennifer's tears when she told me they were worried about me. I thought about Emma, growing up with a grandfather who'd either be declared mentally incompetent or revealed to be a liar. I had 4 days to decide whether to end the experiment or let it destroy everything I'd ever cared about. And for the first time since Sarah died, I wasn't sure I was strong enough to make the right choice. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. The evaluation was scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning at the county mental health facility, and I'd spent the entire weekend going back and forth between calling my financial advisor and letting the charade continue to its inevitable conclusion. At 3 a.m., I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago when my phone rang. Sam's number. "Dad? I'm sorry to call so late. I couldn't sleep." "Neither could I. Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." I braced myself. "Okay. Do you really have money? Not fantasy money, not money you think you have, but real money in real accounts that really exists?" The question hung between us in the darkness, and I realized this was the moment. This was the choice that would determine everything that happened next. "Yes." "How much?" I closed my eyes. "More than you can imagine." There was a long silence. When Sam spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "Dad, if that's true, why didn't you just show us? Why did you let it get this far?" "Because I needed to know something." "Know what?" "I needed to know who would treat me with respect when they thought I had nothing to offer." Another silence, longer this time. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that you love me enough to try to save me from myself, even when it means making the hardest decisions of your life. I learned that Jennifer includes me in her family even when she thinks I'm a burden. I learned that your in-laws are willing to help someone they barely know because they care about your happiness." "Dad, those are good things." "They are. But I also learned that none of you trust me enough to believe I might know what I'm doing." "How could we trust you when you weren't telling us the truth?" The question hit me like a physical blow because it was so obviously right. How could I expect them to trust my judgment when I'd been deliberately misleading them about the most basic facts of my life? "Sam, I've made a terrible mistake." "Yeah, you have. But Dad, if you really have money, if this is all real, then we can fix this. You can prove it tomorrow, and we can all move forward." "What if I can't prove it?" "What do you mean?" "I've been thinking about this all weekend, about what would happen if I revealed the truth. Sam and Jennifer would have to confront the fact that they'd been completely wrong about me. They'd have to deal with the knowledge that I'd watched them make sacrifices for a problem that didn't exist. They'd have to figure out how to trust someone who'd been lying to them for months. What if proving it hurts you more than not proving it?" "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Sam, if I show you how much money I really have, you're going to realize that you've been worrying about me for no reason. You're going to understand that you and Jennifer have been limiting your own dreams to help someone who didn't need help. You're going to know that I sat through months of conversations about my financial struggles while I could have solved every problem you've ever worried about." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Dad, how much money are we talking about?" "Enough to buy Jennifer's parents' house without financing." Enough to pay for Emma's entire education without touching the principal. Enough to make sure you never have to worry about money for the rest of your life. Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. Dad, why? Why would you do this to us? It was the question I'd been dreading, because I wasn't sure I had an answer that would make sense to anyone but me. Because after your mother died, I felt like I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything we'd built together, everything we'd accomplished, it all felt meaningless without her. I needed to know what it felt like to be valued for something other than what I could afford. So you decided to lie to your family? I decided to live simply and see how people treated me. By letting us think you were struggling. By not correcting your assumptions. Dad, that's the same thing. He was right, and we both knew it. I'd been telling myself that I wasn't lying, just withholding information, but the effect had been the same. I'd let my family believe something that wasn't true, and I'd used their love and concern as data points in an experiment they didn't know they were participating in. Sam, I know I've hurt you. I know I've hurt Jennifer. I know this changes everything between us. Yeah, it does. But Dad, you're still my father. Emma is still your granddaughter. We're still family, even if I don't understand why you did this. What do you want me to do tomorrow? I want you to tell the truth. All of it. I want you to show them the money, and then I want you to explain to me and Jennifer why you thought this was a good idea. And then we figure out how to move forward. But Dad, this can't happen again. No more experiments, no more tests, no more lies. If we're going to be a family, we have to be honest with each other. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and thought about what honesty would look like. It would mean admitting that I'd been wrong. It would mean acknowledging that my experiment had caused real harm to people I loved. It would mean accepting that my family's reaction to my behavior had been reasonable given the information they had. But it would also mean revealing that I'd been testing them, and I wasn't sure they'd ever forgive me for that. At 6 a.m., I called my financial advisor. Patrick, I need you to meet me at the county mental health facility at 9 a.m. with a complete portfolio summary. Robert, are you sure about this? I'm sure. It's time to end this. What should I bring? Everything. Bank statements, investment summaries, property deeds, the works. I want them to understand exactly how wrong they've been. And then what? And then I hope my family can forgive me for being an idiot. I showered, put on my best clothes, and drove to the mental health facility with a strange sense of relief. The experiment was over. The lies were ending. Whatever happened next, at least it would be based on the truth. I arrived to find Sam, Jennifer, and Dr. Martinez waiting in the lobby. Sam looked like he hadn't slept, and Jennifer's eyes were red from crying. When they saw me, Jennifer stood up and walked over. Robert, before we go in there, I need you to know something. What? Even if you don't have money, even if this is all in your head, we love you. We're going to take care of you. You're not going to face this alone. The kindness in her voice almost broke me. Here was this woman who thought I might be mentally ill, who'd been planning her budget around my imaginary poverty, and she was promising to stand by me no matter what the evaluation revealed. Jennifer, there's something you need to know. What? Before I could answer, Patrick walked through the front doors carrying a leather briefcase and looking like the successful financial advisor he was. Expensive suit, confident bearing, the kind of presence that suggested serious money. Robert, good morning. I have everything you requested. Sam stared at Patrick, then at me, then back at Patrick. Dad, who is this? This is Patrick Webb, my financial advisor. Dr. Martinez looked confused. Mr. Chandler, you didn't mention having a financial advisor. There are a lot of things I haven't mentioned. Patrick opened his briefcase and pulled out a bound portfolio that was easily 50 pages thick. Dr. Martinez, I assume. I'm here to provide documentation of Mr. Chandler's financial assets at his request. He handed her the portfolio, and I watched her face change as she flipped through the pages. Her expression went from professional skepticism to confusion to something approaching shock. Mr. Chandler, according to these documents, you have assets totaling $85 million, I said quietly. The lobby went completely silent. Sam's face had gone white, and Jennifer was staring at me like I just announced I was from another planet. Dad, Sam said slowly, what the hell is going on? Emma looked up at me with those serious baby eyes and made a small sound that might have been approval. Robert, Jennifer said, there's one more thing. What? We're going to need help with the foundation. Someone who understands both money and people, someone who can help us make sure we're actually making a difference. I know just the person, Patrick said. My wife runs a non-profit consulting firm. She specializes in helping new foundations develop effective giving strategies. Perfect, Sam said. Let's set up a meeting. As the evening wound down and people started to leave, I found myself alone with Sam and Jennifer and Emma. The house felt different now, warmer somehow, like a weight had been lifted. Dad, Sam said, I need you to understand something. What? This isn't going to be easy. Rebuilding trust takes time, and there are going to be moments when I'm angry all over again about what you put us through. I understand. But I also need you to know that I'm proud of you for telling the truth, even when it was hard. And I'm proud that you're willing to use your resources to help people. Your mother would have insisted on it. Yeah, she would have. She also would have kicked your ass for lying to us for so long. I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in weeks. She absolutely would have. Jennifer smiled. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you. And she would have been over the moon about Emma. Robert, can I ask you something? Anything. When you were conducting your experiment, when you were watching us worry about you, did you ever feel guilty? I thought about the question, about the months of watching them make sacrifices for a problem that didn't exist. Every day. But I told myself it was for a good cause, that I was learning something important about human nature. And what did you learn? I learned that love isn't about what you can afford to give someone. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice for them. I learned that you and Sam would give up your own dreams to take care of someone you thought needed help. I learned that family isn't about money or status or any of the things I thought mattered. You could have learned all of that by just asking us. I know. But I was so caught up in being scientific about it that I forgot about being human. Jennifer picked up Emma, who had fallen asleep in my arms. Well, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to be human going forward. Starting with helping us figure out how to change the world with $87 million. I can't think of anything I'd rather do. As I drove home to my small apartment for what I hoped would be one of the last times, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. I'd started with a simple question about respect and ended up nearly destroying the most important relationships in my life. But I'd also learned something valuable, something that had nothing to do with my original experiment. I'd learned that forgiveness is possible, even when you've made terrible mistakes. I'd learned that love can survive deception if it's strong enough and if the person who's done the deceiving is willing to do the work of rebuilding trust. Most importantly, I'd learned that wealth without purpose is just numbers on a page, but wealth used to help others becomes something transformative. The experiment was over, but the real work was just beginning. 6 months later, I was standing in the living room of my new house in Tacoma, watching Emma take her first wobbly steps across the hardwood floor. She was 10 months old now, with Sarah's dark eyes and Sam's determined expression, and she was absolutely fearless. "Come on, Emma," I called, crouching down with my arms outstretched. "Come to Grandpa." She took 3 unsteady steps before tumbling into my arms, giggling with pure joy. Behind her, Sam and Jennifer were beaming with pride, their phones out to capture every moment. "Did you get it?" Jennifer asked Sam. "Got it." Her first steps at Grandpa's house. The house was everything Richard and Patricia had promised. 4 bedrooms, a beautiful garden, and enough space for family gatherings without anyone feeling cramped. But more than that, it felt like home in a way my small apartment never had. It was a place where I could be myself, where Emma could grow up knowing her grandfather as he really was. "Robert, the caterers are here," Patricia called from the kitchen. "Should I have them set up in the dining room?" "Perfect, thank you." Today was the official launch of the Sarah Chandler Foundation for Family Support, named after my wife who would have loved seeing her legacy used to help others navigate grief and loss. We were hosting a small gathering of family, friends, and the nonprofit professionals who'd helped us get everything organized. The foundation had 3 main focuses: supporting families dealing with sudden loss, providing resources for elderly people who wanted to maintain their independence, and funding research into the psychological impacts of major life transitions. It was ambitious, but with $87 million in assets, we had the resources to make a real difference. "Dad, can you believe this is actually happening?" Sam asked, settling onto the couch next to me with Emma on his lap. "Honestly? No. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a mental health facility being evaluated for cognitive decline. Now we're launching a foundation that's going to help thousands of people. It's been quite a journey." That was an understatement. The past 6 months have been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, strategic planning, and family therapy sessions. Dr. Martinez had been right about needing professional help to rebuild trust. We'd spent hours in counseling, working through the hurt and anger my deception had caused. It hadn't been easy. There were sessions where Sam couldn't even look at me, where Jennifer cried about feeling manipulated, where I had to confront the selfishness of my experiment. But slowly, painfully, we'd found our way back to each other. The breakthrough had come during a session in February, when Dr. Martinez asked Sam what he'd learned from the experience. "I learned that my father is human," he'd said. "I learned that even people you love and respect can make terrible decisions when they're grieving and confused. And I learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, it's about choosing to move forward together." Jennifer had added, "I learned that family isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to do the hard work of staying connected even when someone screws up badly. And I'd learned that redemption isn't about erasing your mistakes. It's about using them to become a better person and to help others avoid the same pitfalls." "Robert, the foundation board is here," Patrick called from the front door. The board was small but impressive, Patrick as financial advisor, his wife Sarah as nonprofit consultant, Dr. Martinez as psychological advisor, and surprisingly, Richard and Patricia, who'd insisted on being involved after seeing how the foundation could honor both Sarah's memory and the lessons we'd all learned. "Are you ready for this?" Jennifer asked, adjusting Emma's dress. "I think so. Are you?" "More than ready. I've been looking forward to this for months." The launch event was everything I'd hoped it would be. About 50 people gathered in my living room and dining room, including several families who'd already benefited from our pilot programs. There was Maria Santos, whose husband had died suddenly in a car accident, leaving her with 3 young children and no idea how to navigate the financial and emotional challenges of single parenthood. The foundation had connected her with grief counselors, financial advisors, and a support group of other young widows. There was Frank Nolan, an 82-year-old man whose children lived across the country and who'd been struggling to maintain his independence after a minor stroke. Our aging-in-place program had helped him modify his home, arrange for meal delivery, and connect with neighbors who checked on him regularly. And there was Dr. Rebecca Walsh, a researcher at the University of Washington who was using our grant money to study how sudden wealth affects family dynamics and mental health. Her work would help other families avoid the mistakes I'd made. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, standing up with a glass of champagne, "thank you all for being here today. 6 months ago, I was a man who'd lost his way after losing his wife. I'd made some terrible decisions that hurt the people I loved most, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever find my way back to being the person Sarah would have been proud of." I looked around the room at the faces of people who'd become part of our extended family through the foundation. But I learned something important during that dark time. I learned that redemption isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing to acknowledge your mistakes, make amends for the harm you've caused, and use your resources to help others. Sam stood up next to me. "My father made some choices that were hard to understand and harder to forgive. But he also taught me something about the difference between having money and using money wisely. The Sarah Chandler Foundation isn't just about helping people in crisis. It's about honoring the memory of a woman who believed that wealth without purpose is meaningless." Jennifer joined us, still holding Emma. "Robert, when you first told us about your experiment, I was angry and hurt. I felt manipulated and betrayed. But I've come to understand that your journey, as painful as it was for all of us, led us to something beautiful. This foundation is going to help families stay together during their darkest moments. It's going to help elderly people maintain their dignity and independence. And it's going to advance our understanding of how people cope with major life changes." To the Sarah Chandler Foundation, Richard called out, raising his glass. "To second chances," Patricia added. "To family," Sam said. "To love that survives even our worst mistakes," I concluded. As everyone drank and applauded, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Sarah died, a sense of purpose that went beyond my own needs and fears. The foundation wasn't just about helping others. It was about transforming my grief and guilt into something that honored Sarah's memory and strengthened the bonds with my family. After the guests left and the caterers cleaned up, I found myself alone in my garden with Emma while Sam and Jennifer finished some paperwork inside. She was sitting on a blanket, playing with blocks and babbling in the way babies do when they're perfectly content. "You know, Emma," I said, settling down next to her, "your grandmother would have loved this day. She would have loved seeing our family come together to help other families. And she would have loved watching you grow up in a house filled with love and honesty." Emma looked up at me and smiled, then went back to her blocks. "Your daddy and mommy are good people, sweetheart. Better than your grandpa deserved after the mistakes I made. But they forgave me, and they're helping me become the man I should have been all along." My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor from the apartment complex. "Saw the article about your foundation in the paper. So proud of you, Robert. Sarah would be too." The article had run in the Seattle Times that morning, a feature story about the foundation and its mission. The reporter had been respectful about my personal story, focusing more on the work we were doing than on the deception that had led to it. But she'd included enough details to make it clear that the foundation had grown out of a family crisis that had ultimately brought us closer together. "Robert?" Jennifer called from the house. "Can you come in for a minute? There's something we want to show you." I picked up Emma and carried her inside, where Sam and Jennifer were standing next to a large wrapped package. "What's this?" "Open it," Sam said. I unwrapped the package to reveal a framed photograph of Sarah, taken during our last vacation together before she got sick. She was sitting on a beach in Hawaii, laughing at something I'd said, her hair blowing in the ocean breeze. Below the photo was a small plaque that read, Sarah Chandler, 1955 to 2019. Beloved wife, mother-in-law, and inspiration. Her love continues to change the world. We thought she should have a place of honor in the Foundation headquarters, Jennifer said. Foundation headquarters? Your home office, Sam explained. We've been thinking that since you're going to be working full-time on Foundation business, you should make it official. I looked at the photograph of Sarah, at her joyful expression and bright eyes, and I felt her presence in a way I hadn't since she died. She would have loved this, I said. We know, Jennifer replied. That's why we're doing it. As the evening wound down and Sam and Jennifer prepared to take Emma home, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. A year ago, I'd been a broken man conducting a misguided experiment on the people I loved most. Tonight, I was surrounded by family who'd forgiven my mistakes and helped me transform my resources into something meaningful. Dad, Sam said as they were leaving, I want you to know something. What's that? I'm proud of you. Not for having money, not for being able to fund a foundation, but for being willing to admit you were wrong and do the work to make things right. That means everything to me, son. And Dad? No more experiments, okay? If you want to know how we feel about something, just ask. I laughed. Deal. No more experiments. After they left, I sat in my living room with Sarah's photograph, thinking about the future. The foundation was just getting started. We had plans to expand our programs, to partner with other organizations, to fund research that would help families navigate crisis more effectively. But more than that, I had my family back. I had Emma growing up knowing her grandfather as he really was. I had Sam and Jennifer trusting me again, slowly but surely. I had Richard and Patricia treating me as an equal partner in something important. I'd learned that respect isn't something you can test for or experiment with. It's something you earn through your actions, your honesty, and your willingness to use whatever resources you have to make the world a little better. My phone rang. An unknown number. Mr. Chandler. This is Dr. Amanda Foster from Johns Hopkins. I read about your foundation in the Times, and I'm wondering if you might be interested in funding a research project on grief counseling for children who've lost parents. Tell me more, I said, reaching for a notepad. As Dr. Foster explained her research, I realized that this was just the beginning. The foundation would grow, the programs would expand, and hopefully, we'd help thousands of families navigate the kind of loss and confusion that had nearly destroyed my own family. But tonight, I was just grateful. Grateful for second chances, grateful for forgiveness, grateful for the opportunity to honor Sarah's memory by helping others. And grateful that sometimes, even when you make terrible mistakes, love can find a way to transform them into something beautiful. Dr. Foster, I said, I think we should definitely talk. When can you come to Seattle? The future was full of possibilities, and for the first time since Sarah died, I was excited to see what came next. But before I dive into planning the next chapter of this journey, I want to ask you something. How are you doing? Where are you watching this from? I hope this story has resonated with you in some way, maybe reminded you of the importance of honesty in your own relationships, or inspired you to think about how you can use whatever resources you have to help others. If you've made it this far, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. And drop a comment below telling me about a time when you had to rebuild trust with someone you loved, or about a moment when you realized that your assumptions about someone were completely wrong. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out how to love each other better, how to forgive each other's mistakes, and how to use whatever we've been given to make the world a little brighter. Thanks for taking this journey with me. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to make things right with the people you love, and it's never too late to turn your mistakes into something meaningful. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.